Welcome to Stay Sharp with Razorleaf, your secret weapon for all things digital and products and manufacturing. In this episode of Stay Sharp, hosts Jen Farello and Jonathan Scott are joined by Eric Doubell to recap a transformative year in digital engineering and manufacturing. They discuss the rise of digital twins, the impact to AI, and the evolving role of cloud PLM. From navigating challenges in AI adoption to debating integration versus best-in-class solutions, they explore how the recent trends over the past year are shaping the industry. Let's tune in. Welcome back to Stay Sharp, the podcast about all things digital related to products and manufacturing. I am Jen Farello, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Jonathan Scott.
Hey, everybody.
And we also have a special guest, Razorleaf's CEO, Eric Doubell. Welcome back, Eric.
Thanks. Hey, everyone.
So it's the end of the year. We are starting to take a look back as we're starting to look forward, because that'll happen within the next couple of weeks. We're taking a look back at what we've seen in the industry today. Over the past year, what were the big hits of last year of 2024? What were the big misses? And what were some of the big surprises? And I think we probably have a few more of those than almost anything.
Yeah.
So Jonathan, either of you guys want to start us off? What was the biggest hit or the biggest miss or the biggest surprise of this year?
All right, so I'll kick it off with one. I don't know if it's biggest, right? But I'll throw one out there. For me, digital twin's been a topic for a couple of years, but this year, and this is, like everything we're going to say today, just our observations, right. The number of businesses who I don't think of as traditional PLM vendors or in the PLM space, in the digital product space, who are getting into digital twin, that's been a surprise for me, right? And I'll give you one example, and I've seen others. I probably didn't do enough homework for this episode, but because I've seen a bunch, that's what's surprising to me about it. But the one I'll mention is NVIDIA, right? NVIDIA is huge in AI. We know they've been making graphics cards for years. So
right.
Technically, I guess they sort of are in this space, but I have never thought of them as a software vendor in the PLM space. And, the last 2 months, I'm getting ads constantly about digital twin builder from NVIDIA, that kind of thing. I'm not trying to do a commercial for them, but my point is it's been a bunch of companies like that who I would not have expected who are getting into this. And there's a logical connection. It's not that it's totally out of left field, but right. It's just interesting to me that it's that big of a trend that other people are getting into it from outside of our kind of core market.
Just sort of a confluence. Everybody's coming together at this point and...
Or that everybody thinks it's that interesting, right? I mean, to me, that says something about the trend itself of digital twin, that it's striking a chord enough that people who are outside of the market are looking at it and saying, there's an opportunity there.
Right.
The other thing I've seen, and I don't know if it's just because I've been paying more attention to it over the last year, is digital manufacturing's become a bigger seems to be more prevalent, more people talking about it, more people looking at it as the next thing they want to focus on. Traditionally, we've looked at PLM and we've looked at ERP, but I'm hearing more and more about manufacturing execution than I ever have before.
I'm going to try and explain that, Eric. I have no idea, again, if this is right, but I think that the Industry 4.0 message is a big message that's catching on, right? I hear a lot more business people talking about it. And when people think about that, for me, the focus a lot of times is on the manufacturing side of it, more so than the engineering side. And I think, I won't say that the PLM market is mature, and I know there's lots of people out there who have a lot of digital product in engineering work to do. But I think a lot of folks are saying, wait a minute, we haven't been giving the same attention to the manufacturing side, and we've got all this great data that we're not using. And so to me, it feels like catch up. I guess that's a long way of saying it feels like catch up to me, why you would be hearing that, not like mustard and ketchup.
The Industry 4.0 is something that, I guess another thing to think about is that I've, for years heard a lot about that in Europe, but I haven't heard a lot about that in the US. And now I'm hearing it in the US more. And it's not that we haven't been doing those things. It's just we haven't been using that name for what we've been doing, it seems.
It seems like there was kind of a gap. Like when the term was first coined, we used it a lot. And then you didn't hear it for a while. And now it's back.
Yeah. And back in a different market, to Eric's point.
Right.
I'm going to piggyback on that one and say, here's a surprise for me. And I'm super uninformed on this topic, but the other day I heard Industry 5.0. And I'm like, what? No, so I don't know if it was somebody, just trying to get attention by saying it, but I saw it a couple places and I thought, seriously? Industry 4.0 is, to Eric's point, it's sort of back to catching on and people are paying attention to it again. How can we be ready for another one?
Well, maybe it's that. It's like, well, it can't be Industry 4.0. That's old news. So we have to call it something else. So
I guess
5.0. I guess it's, aside from those 2 points, one of the things, and maybe it's not a surprise that I've seen in 2024 is that it seems like the additive space is back in its contraction phase. I mean, it's been very up and down since this started. Very high expectations, and then lower than expected turnout. There was at one point a ton of new startups in the space.
Right
now, they're either, running out of runway or getting acquired. It just definitely feels like there's a contraction, and I don't know if I don't think it's a failure of the technology itself. I think it might just be the different pieces outpacing themselves. It's a space where you've got the technology is changing, the hardware is changing, and the materials are changing. And we have so many different things changing all at one time. I think it's hard to keep up with. What are we actually going to do with this?
I think the industry still seems to be growing. There does seem to be consolidation. I still don't know that there's a lot of people making a lot of money in it. The manufacturers still seem to report losses regularly. So it's still in that growth investment phase, but it is being talked about a lot less. But I think, like anything, AI's kind of taken the wind out of the sails of every other message that's out there.
Yeah.
And so everyone's talking AI and everything else is getting left in the dust from a conversation standpoint.
Okay, I want to go to AI. We can't have this episode without talking about AI, right? But before we do, I want to come back to the additive thing for a minute. I have a theory. Man, is it half-baked, even more so than the opinions I gave a couple minutes ago. But I heard something, and I've seen a couple of data points on this at a conference a couple of years ago, and it related to a couple of large manufacturers who were getting into additive, and they saw huge promise in it. But as part of that, what they did is they were sort of partnering with and investing in some of the additive companies who were making the 3D printers. But then they were saying, look, I appreciate the machine you made and the process you've got, but there's some of this that I want to be my secret sauce. And so these were large companies who already spent time on material science and, really could do a lot of hardcore R&D. And what they wanted was to get under the hood of the firmware of these machines so they could control more about how the laser speed and the metallurgy of the printed metal they were doing, right? But basically it was the customer saying, I want to be part of the product development because I don't want to have the same machine that my competitors have, right? I want to have a different capability. So I wonder about that in that space, right? Because it feels like to me a lot of the additive manufacturing folks, they are focused on how to print materials that exist or are similar to materials that exist, but the customers they serve are seeing an opportunity for like new materials and being more creative even than the additive vendors are being. And I wonder if that has something to do with the adoption, right? That it's like the products aren't finished yet. The additive makers are making good printers, but the people buying it are like, well, that's not exactly the capability I want. I want to put my own twist on it before I scale it, So anyway, I wonder if that has anything to do with the trough.
Well, and I mean, scaling is actually hard in that space as well. And that's, I think, one of the biggest problems. And it actually kind of ties back to manufacturing execution systems. So there have been a number of, I'm not going to call them startups, but startup technologies in that space as far as being able to automate the additive processes, because that's one of the real challenges is actually doing it at scale.
Right.
It's fine to do like you're going to do one custom piece or you print something out on your own, but like to actually reliably produce a piece or component or assembly in at a scale that it's profitable is challenging.
Well, that reminds me of one that feels like a miss. And I don't know that anybody predicted it would happen in 2024. So maybe it's not a miss, but one of the pieces of hype about additive was, soon we'll be able to drive down transportation costs of products, because what everybody's going to be doing is they'll pop up these little local factories, right, of additive machines. And then you won't have to truck your goods or ship your goods around the world, that kind of thing. You'll just send the digital files for the product and make it. And to your point about scaling, Jen, scaling may not always be, hey, can I put 100 3D printers in a factory? It may be, can I scatter 100 3D printers across the country?
Right.
It's another, way that people were talking it was going to happen. And it still makes sense to me. But I guess, probably the price of oil and transport has something to do with that and all those things. But anyway, it's another thing I don't see happening yet.
Right. No, I agree. Those are manufacturing pods almost that they were supposed to be doing.
Right. All right, Eric, back to AI. Sorry, I jumped in and you were right. AI, we got to talk about AI.
Well, I mean, which of us in preparing for this didn't do a quick ask of ChatGPT this morning?
Okay, fine. I'm a little slow.
No, I mean, but you're right. AI is everywhere. I just, my daughter has been working on papers and research, and it's really, I think that's the most common use of it, that like universally everybody is getting on. Okay, yeah, this is kind of cool. But the explosion that we've seen in the digital space, the digital engineering space, really took me by surprise.
I'm with you. It shocked me too. And I'll give you the reason it surprised me is, 4, 5, 6, 8 years ago, I don't know what the timing was, when cloud first started showing up in the digital product space, talking about design of products and that kind of thing. A lot of engineering and manufacturing companies were very hesitant, very reluctant, very conservative, that kind of thing. And it was funny because at the time, lots of people were using the analogy, yeah, you said the same thing about online banking 15, 20 years ago, and we all got there. Well, guess what? Engineering and manufacturing, it's getting there. But this has surprised me about AI, is I thought the reaction would be the same way from engineers, from people in engineering and manufacturing, and it hasn't been. Right? It's been more, oh yeah, we got to make sure it's safe, but what can we do with it? Where can it fit? What can it do for us? Right? Now, I won't say it's obviously not all there, but the reaction is the surprise for me.
And that's an interesting thing as well, is that, in the PLM space anyways, you'd expect that they'd be way in front of this, at least the vendors, the OEMs, because they've had AI and generative design for years. They didn't call it AI, but that's basically what it is. But now they seem to have very little messaging about AI. They're still trying to push cloud, and but everyone's wondering what is PLM going to do with AI, and how are the vendors going to talk about that? Because we see very little actual AI language out of them in their day-to-day advertising.
Well, I'll pick a little bit at your point there, Eric. And I'm not an expert inside the OEMs on this to know exactly what tech they're using. But I thought the point they were making when generative design stuff came out was that it was not AI. It's not looking at patterns necessarily, but it is machine learning. It is learning from, all right, try this, it doesn't work, try that, it doesn't work, but it's all was science-based, in terms of like the organic shapes and that kind of thing. So it was different from AI. And I think they were making that point because they thought, yeah, engineers will be conservative. They're not going to want something that's like, oh yeah, I hallucinated it, so it's sure, make the part look like that. And they were right? People didn't want to hear that, but now it's like we're all getting over it so fast that, to your point, I think the OEMs were trying to do what they thought the market wanted, and maybe are surprised like I am that the market's more okay with it than anybody anticipated.
I'm curious, what do you think, and this is a little, I mean, it's exploring this topic a little bit different. Do you think that's because of the technology, or do you think it's just that as engineers, as digital engineering space, like we are getting more comfortable with change?
I wonder what it's about. I don't know if it's about those things, but I wonder what it's about, because it feels weird to me, right? I mean, I was the one saying a year ago, 2 years ago, people started talking about AI. I'm like, yeah, sure, sounds great. But I tell you what I don't ever want is an airplane that's been designed using AI and hasn't been validated with engineering principles. And, and I stand by that, right? What I don't want is a possibility of a hallucination in my, engine bracket.
Right.
I don't want that. But
resulting in a real drop of the engine onto the ground.
Exactly. And yeah, there's people who don't want to talk about that kind of thing. Anyway, on both sides of the Atlantic. But the thing there that is different for me is the uses of AI that are not like mission critical like that you see where it's like, well, okay, I see it helping, but it's not doing the job. And so there's less danger that, somebody's going to get a hallucination that's a safety issue, that kind of thing. But what surprises me is that's the tricky thing. That's the slippery slope, is when you aren't on guard about a new technology and you start to accept it and it just becomes part of your daily life. And then one day you go, why are my teenagers constantly on their phone? Right? I mean, it's that kind of thing. You're like, well, everybody needs a phone and it's okay to have social media. And, and then one day you're like, hold on, I'm not sure I like all this.
Right.
I wonder if AI is going to creep in that same way because we see it as so useful, so fast, and people are excited about it now. I don't know.
It's definitely, it's growing quickly. And it's, to Eric's point, has really sucked the oxygen out of the room for almost everything else. But how much is really out there? To your point, you're saying like, we would have thought PLM would be like out in front about this. And we haven't. We haven't seen those kind of announcements, but that doesn't mean that they're not coming. I know we're looking back right now. And certainly there's a lot of talk about AI. There's a lot of talk about AI companies, a lot of startups in this space.
Well, my theory is that there's so much going on and so much changing so fast that there are a lot of people who maybe weren't on top of their AI investment, but now they've seen the thing that they think will be the killer app in their space, in their niche, and they're working on it. We're not hearing it yet, right? But they're working on it because of some advancement that OpenAI made, or, it's like, oh, wait, if we could make images using AI, hold on, I could use that to do blah, right? And it's just every day we hear about something that's kind of an R&D capability of AI. Right. And I think people are out there just snatching those up going, hold on, now that I got that, I could do this, I could do that. And then maybe next year, I don't know when, but that we'll hear those uses of it in our space. That's my guess anyway.
What do you think, Eric?
I don't know. I can see its application in things like MRO. I can see its applications in change or predictive things. I think it's a little harder in design intent, maybe. But I think from a process standpoint, maybe even who needs to look at certain things that are going on and who needs to be involved maybe in more dynamic change processes. I can see it. It's hard to think about, how to really do something splashy in our space. I don't have a great idea for it. I see in other kinds of business applications, I see great things. I've been looking at HRIS systems and, you get 50 people giving feedback on somebody in a review of something and being able to consolidate that information and give you the theme. That's an easy, great application. It's a little bit harder because of what's involved in the PLM space. As Jonathan mentioned, we don't want fake AI information showing up in a product design that's not reviewed by a human that has the capability to understand what's been done. So it's a little bit trickier in some of those areas, but I think that if we look at right now, AI is taking time out of processes and developing content. So what can we do to, how's it going to be used there?
I think that's right, Eric. To me, it's where it takes time out of the processes and it saves time that a lot of humans see as not, I wouldn't say not value added, but lower value added, right? That we think we can offload to something else, but the cost of explicit automation has been too high. But AI could jump in and kind of guess what needs to be automated and help. Like it feels like those are easy wins, and that's how it's going to endear itself to us.
Yeah, what about documenting things? To the extent that people are still using prints, automatically, generating those prints, automatically writing instructions, whether it's work instructions or assembly instructions or process instructions based on the designs. Those are all areas where I think you could leverage to some advantage.
Yeah.
And maybe why we're hearing so much about AI and it feels like it has taken off so quickly is because everybody's super excited about the potential. Yeah. Okay, and we haven't yet run into, other than some stories about hallucinations and stuff, we haven't yet run into concrete examples of, we tried this with AI and boy, was that a disaster.
Right.
So we're in that like, woohoo, look at the bright, shiny new toy. Yep. But like, it hasn't yet fallen apart. So it'll be interesting next year to see, okay, what became real from AI and what became clear that we should not do AI, or what are the big problems?
Patience. I think people are being patient with the mistakes. I mean, I had someone, explain to me, think about it as an intern that's just out of college. Yep. And, you want to check their work, but they may be really smart and they can do some good stuff with a little bit of guidance. And I think people are actually not necessarily thinking about it that way, but treating it that way. So because it's got such potential, they're overlooking some of the weaknesses and understanding to resolve those things, so you don't just put it in one AI engine, you put it in 3, and then you take all that result and you put it in yet a 4th one to boil it down, kind of double check the double check.
4 interns are better than 1. That's an interesting analogy about the interns.
I like it.
Yeah. I want to go back to something you said, though, Eric, about, when we're thinking about the past year and AI kind of sucking the air out of the room in terms of other things. You mentioned Cloud PLM. I think that's a good one to go back to because for me, it's not a total miss, but there's a miss there. I thought, before we started talking about all this AI stuff, Cloud PLM is the trend. It's where we're going. Lots of people, all the vendors have an offer in the cloud now. There's constantly startups. I shouldn't say constantly. There are startups in the space. And they're having success and they have new ideas and those are fresh and they seem to be addressing problems that maybe weren't as addressed as well. All of that to me said, well, this is the year we're going to see a lot more adoption. But it doesn't feel like that to me. I don't have data, but it doesn't feel like that.
It doesn't. That's the way the OEMs are messaging it. It's one of those things where it makes it sound like they're doing more than they're doing. I mean, it's that desperation to get more people on board, but you haven't seen an avalanche of it like I would have expected by now. It seems like steady state growth as much as anything.
Yeah, but I wonder if, again, that's because cloud is more mature than AI. Because it's in that acceptance phase that it's not going to get that exciting growth because it's in application, right? You're talking about real engineers doing real work and changing their processes and moving from desktop to cloud and being okay with that and but the fact that I think it's still growing and growing consistently says that this is a trend that's here to stay. We're moving in this direction, and it's interesting because
technology. It seems like it's an incremental technology too, right? It's not a whole new way of doing things. Because everyone's saying, well, here's what you used to be able to do on premise. Now we can do it over here. And here's the advantages, but they're not.
It's not disruptive.
Not change the world kind of advantages.
Yeah.
Right. It's almost like a new operating system or new platform. But the thing is, it's also an enabling, it also enables AI, right? So AI needs access and data. Cloud enables that. Like you can't, if you didn't have desktop or if you didn't have Cloud CAD, you wouldn't be able to share the data necessarily as easily as you can to, go ahead.
Certainly for SMB, right? I mean, the large companies, they probably do whatever they want in their data center or wherever it is. But to your point, everybody else, you're not going to get the kind of compute power you need to do AI unless you're using cloud resources. And, well, it needs a data set, like you said, and unless your data set's in the cloud or you've got incredible bandwidth or what, so it's a reason, a motivation to be on the cloud with your data is now AI. That data is more accessible to AI. That makes sense to me, but I think that that may be a new motivator that people are realizing. Because Eric's point, I agree, it makes sense. It's incremental. And frankly, some of the advantages of cloud PLM, the other parts of the tech stack that make up cloud PLM are sort of eating away that incremental margin, that difference, right? And here's what I mean by that. I take a cloud tool 4 or 5 years ago, they really had an edge in, hey, I can share data more easily because anybody, your suppliers, your customers, whatever, can get right to the web platform and it's secure and they can, so I can share files, no problem. Okay, that was a little bit tougher with your on-prem PLM because it was behind your DMZ and it was on your data center and you didn't let people in the same way. Well, but now companies are taking their on-prem PLM and IT is just rehosting it on Amazon or Azure or whatever,
right?
Just to save costs or whatnot. But now suddenly, oh, wait, that data is in a place that maybe I could expose it more easily. And so this reason why you might move to cloud PLM, this benefit, kind of went away. And it had nothing to do with the cloud PLM vendor or the PLM vendor. It had everything to do with, the
engineers
tech stack.
Figuring out another way to do it.
Yeah, exactly. So, some of that, I think you guys are onto something that it's not that it was a bad trend or it's not popular. It's just the value of it is shrinking a little bit incrementally. And so people aren't jumping on it.
I think I do still think, though, it's here to stay. Like, I don't think that, rehosting desktop is ever going to be as effective because it's just not, it's not going to be growing. There's nobody looking at, hey, how do we continue to improve that? It's a one-step kind of process. So yeah, we'll put these applications, out on AWS or something like that.
And there are lots of little values. There are lots of little values to it, to your point, right? And there, I don't have to keep up with the upgrades. Oh, I don't have to do that. Lots of things you don't have to do with cloud compared with on-prem hosted on a cloud machine. But I think it's just people will pick the right moment because it's not this big, like, well, holy cow, it's going to get us this benefit. We better do that now. It's, it'll be good. It'll help us over time. Let's do it when we can.
Well, not to get into what's coming, but, I think that if the vendors get their messaging right about how you can take more advantage of AI because of the cloud, that'll help them migrate more customers to the cloud. The issue that you're going to run into is, you remember when cloud first came up, I was concerned about security and my data and things like that. What happens when you've got an AI engine doing that? How do those vendors in a multi-tenant model segment that customer's data to teach the engine and not share that same teaching in some way that gives away some proprietary IP to someone else? But then if it's only learning on your data, do you have a good enough data set to be able to teach it enough to be valuable to you to do something? So there's a lot of tricky things that have to be figured out, I think, to be able to take advantage of that messaging about you want to be in the cloud so you can do AI better with PLM. Hopefully they're thinking about that, but I see that as a hurdle to adoption of some of these things on a multi-tenant model. It'll be safer to put it up in in some cloud instance that you manage and maintain your own data set.
You just brought up a really interesting challenge that I hadn't thought of, Eric. I think you just made a prediction for 2025. Here's what I heard. Companies will start banding together in guilds to share their data for the ultimate AI weapon. No, never mind. That's not what you said. But it's an interesting point about cloud enabling and also hindering maybe some of these AI capabilities. And so where do those fit? We talked about it just overshadowing it, but there's a connection too.
Well, and the danger is if they don't get that figured out and start talking about that, then the whole area, the PLM, will become less interesting to the public next year because again, AI is sucking air out of everything. And so they'll go into other systems that are exploiting AI more, and we'll lose the press, the popularity, the drive to do something because it's not the trendy thing to do.
Right. All right. I want to switch gears. Other things from the year that I think are notable or interesting. Synopsys bought Ansys, right? And there's probably a couple other acquisitions we could talk about. But what surprised me or still surprises me is the acquisition hasn't closed yet. So it was very strange to me that an electronics vendor, and arguably they have software tools too. I don't mean that that's just all they do, but that somebody in that's focused on an industry would buy Ansys, who to me seems more broadly just a PLM simulation product player. That seemed interesting, and the fact that there's some some regulatory holdup to it, also surprises me. I'm like, this is a niche market. How's there any issue with, monopoly or something like that? So that one seemed odd to me.
I think acquisitions like that, of that size, do tend to run into concerns about regulatory compliance. And like you said, it is the concerns with regard to monopolies. How much overlap is there? How much,
Right.
And just, I think there was more in that deal than I think anyone expected as far as overlap goes.
Certainly more than I realized, right? Because again, I'm just sort of from the outside, I'm like, that's curious, but there must be.
All right, we'll see. We'll watch and see the Siemens Altair, because that's another one that was just announced recently.
Yeah.
How quickly that goes.
You probably can't talk too much about that.
I cannot talk about that at all, in fact.
Yeah.
But
it's a huge one. That one caught me off guard.
Well, and me too. I was like, because it's not my part of the company. But I saw it on, whatever, LinkedIn or whatever, wherever I saw the announcement. I'm like, wow, that's a big deal. And it is a very big deal, money-wise. But I think from what I've heard and can say is that Siemens looked very carefully at the acquisition before tendering any sort of offer to make sure that they felt they were not going to run into that same regulatory compliance. There is less overlap than you might think, and more like just fitting the pieces together.
Yeah. And I was surprised years ago when Dassault did that with Abacus. Right. I thought, wow, and now it makes perfect sense to me, right? And it's sort of logical that Siemens did the same with Altair. And Autodesk did something like that with Nastran or Patran years ago. So it sort of adds up that everybody's got a simulation piece. Although another surprise to me, and this isn't just from the past year, though, is that Synopsys is who bought Ansys, because I thought 4 or 5 years ago, PTC was going to do that. It seemed like another logical fit. They were partnering closely together, that kind of thing. So anyway, interesting to me that that's where Ansys went.
Right. Well, and just, one of those things that we have talked about in the past is, so talking about those particular acquisitions, it's a way of connecting the digital thread, right? If you can offer somebody all of the different pieces that they need to design and manufacture their products. One of the things you and I have talked about is the trend towards massive platform that offers you all of the things versus best in class, the plug and play, integrating the different disparate pieces.
You're right. It's been a topic for us several times. And I, at least in 2024, I still don't see any kind of winner or trend there, right? I see people doing both.
Right.
And I do see people who like the big platforms, of course, still need integration, because even those tools don't do everything. You still need specialized things.
Because many of them were basically acquired.
Right.
So it's not like there's still integration work to be done there. They're not,
the OEMs are still integrating themselves, and we're still integrating for them. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
The other thing, though, is what they're trying to encompass and put their arms around gets bigger every year. And so as what you have to incorporate gets bigger, the platform can never catch up. And, you've got the big players that are very proprietary, so that you can't just plug and play other stuff into it in most cases.
So I agree with you, but this is, and we're very careful not to tout too much product, tout too much Razorleaf, et cetera. But I will say that this is one area that I feel like Siemens has a bit of a head start on the other big vendors because of Parasolid, because it's got that underlying geometry kernel, and even the company, it's like Altair, their products are Parasolid based, or a good number of them are. So you've already got that base level of integration from NX, Solid Edge, et cetera, to CD Adapco was another one that Siemens acquired years ago, also Parasolid based. So
you're right. When you own some of the tech in addition to the app, then, and it's particularly if it's a common tech,
Right.
then acquisitions are a little easier because they might already be using your tech and it's pre-integrated.
But it gets past the design model and into things like the MBSE and other models there, and it gets into other business systems that are behemoths in their own right, that have their own platforms that are limited as well, and nobody wants to share because any of those big players could jump into your space through an acquisition or through some of their own R&D. And so how do you deal with these super domain platforms that all have their own part of an organization carved out and make a single platform? I mean, look at it as something as simple as even competing against the office space. So, are vendors going to do their own email systems, their own chat systems, their own Slack or whatever it is?
Well, and you do see that in PLM systems, right? I mean, they do have their own messaging.
Yep.
And can that succeed against Microsoft? And how do you have a single platform when you've got such dominant players in such big spaces?
It's a great question. I certainly didn't see anything in 2024 that made me think there's a clear answer, a clear direction on it. It just seems more confused than ever.
Yeah, I mean, integration and best in class is one of those things that's never going to go away, because you like smaller startups, et cetera, like are always going to be able to move faster and innovate faster.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing to watch.
Well, Jen, not to be the one to watch the time, but I'm just saying.
You're just saying?
I'm just saying.
Well, this has been a very fun discussion, though. We could probably continue doing this for quite some time.
And I'm sure we missed something, right? And if I would just go check ChatGPT, I'd probably know what. But
I don't know. There's probably a couple of things like, we didn't talk a lot about quantum computing other than I mentioned NVIDIA. We didn't talk about sustainability. Yeah, we didn't talk about,
we missed
a lot
few
of different things. AR, VR, which again...
Oh, there's another one that's a miss.
Well,
right?
but is it, or is it just, again, that AI sucked the oxygen out of the room for the last 6 months?
All right, I'm gonna stand on this one. It's a miss because somebody told me this year, I was floored by this. Microsoft discontinued the HoloLens platform. I was like, I thought that was, to me, like that's where it was going. Yeah, it wasn't the final thing, but it was going to iterate from there. But the fact that they stopped, I'm like, all right, wow, that tells me something. Anyway, we're supposed to be wrapping up, and here you got me going again. Oh. Stop it.
That'd be volume 2 of what happened in 2024.
Maybe because I know we're talking about having a, what's coming in 2025. Maybe we can start that off with a little bit of, and by the way, this.
There you go.
So, all right, Jonathan, you want to wrap us up or you want me to do it?
You know what? I'll wrap us up. I'm going to make it simple.
All right.
We talked about a lot of stuff that happened and didn't happen in 2024. I can't say that any of it is earth-shattering. AI is probably the headline, right? And it took away from all the other news. There are lots of things that maybe aren't progressing as fast as we would expect. Cloud PLM, additive. I don't know. What did I miss? But it feels like all that's just being overshadowed by the talk about AI.
The potential of AI.
True story.
But
that's all I got.
Yeah, well, I think it's a good summary of what we've talked about. But this is one of those episodes I really want to hear about. What are our listeners seeing?
Yeah.
What do you see? Because we have, admittedly, we're not experts in everything. We have a limited view of things. So anybody that's out there listening, this is a really good opportunity for you to be part of the conversation we talk about. So please, if there's anything we missed, if there's anything you want us to talk about, and matter of fact, as far as looking forward to 2025, what do you want us to be talking about? Are we on the right page? Let us know. Reach out and talk to us. Jonathan, I want to thank you for co-hosting as always, and Eric for joining us in this one. It wouldn't have been complete without you.
Thanks for inviting me.
And until next time, everybody, stay sharp.
See you guys later.
Bye, guys.
Thanks for being here and listening to this episode of Stay Sharp with Razorleaf. If you have any questions, just leave a comment on our post or send us an email to podcast@razorleaf.com. And if you like this podcast, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, stay sharp.